The hall was enormous. The ceiling stretched so high above that the upper sections disappeared into shadow. Every seat was filled. Hundreds of alien representatives sat behind curved desks arranged in wide rings, each one facing the central floor where speakers came to address the assembly. Lights floated near the ceiling, casting a pale blue glow over everything. The air smelled faintly of chemicals, the kind used to keep so many different species comfortable in the same room. It was the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Concord, and on most days it was a place of slow and careful talk. Today was different. Cole Hargrove sat near the back of the human section and watched the Vorkai delegation walk to the floor. There were 9 of them. They wore long coats the color of dark iron, with rank markings pressed into the shoulders in gold. They moved like they owned the room. Their supreme commander, Vren Salak, led the group. He was tall even by Vorkai standards, with a broad chest and a face that looked like it had never smiled. He carried a folded piece of material under one arm, and Cole recognized it from 30 meters away. It was a page from the original Concord Charter. A very specific page. Cole sat up straighter. Vren Salak reached the center floor and did not wait for the assembly moderator to acknowledge him. He simply began to speak. His voice carried easily through the translation systems built into every desk, arriving in Cole's earpiece as flat, clean words. The Vorkai Dominion has carried 3 wars in 12 years, Vren said. We have won all 3. We have expanded our borders, secured our trade lanes, and proven that no force in this galaxy can meet us in open battle and walk away unchanged. We have earned our place at the top of this assembly. We have earned the right to speak plainly. No one interrupted him. The hall was very quiet. There is a rule in this charter that has been sitting here since before most of your civilizations had star travel, Vren continued. It names one species and tells every member of this Concord that they must never strike that species, never provoke them, never cross into their space without permission. The rule does not apply to any other species. Just one. He paused. We find this embarrassing. We find it weak. A law built around fear is not a law. It is a confession. Cole felt something tighten in his chest. He kept his face still. Vren Salak set the folded charter page on the floor of the speaking area. He reached into his coat and produced a small device, which he placed next to it. He pressed a button. The page caught fire. It burned slowly at first, then faster, the old material curling and blackening at the edges. The translation system captured the sound of it perfectly, a soft, dry crackle that carried through the hall like a whisper. Not one representative stood up. Not one voice called out. The hall watched in silence as the page turned to ash. The Vorkai Dominion does not recognize that rule, Vren said, looking up at the full assembly. We never did. And now we have made that position official. He turned and walked back to the Vorkai section with his 8 delegates behind him. Cole looked down at his desk. His hands were folded in front of him. He did not move for a moment. Then he opened a small message panel and typed 4 words. He sent the message to the office of General Diane Mercer on Earth. The 4 words were, "They did it." Confirmed. Then he closed the panel and watched the moderator try to bring the assembly back to order. It took a long time. After the session ended and the hall emptied into wide corridors, Cole was approached by one of the oldest figures in the Concord. Pel Vajura was an archivist, a small and slow-moving alien with pale gray skin and eyes the color of deep water. He had worked in the Concord for longer than Cole had been alive. He had worked there longer than Cole's father had been alive. He walked with a cane that tapped quietly on the polished floor, and he stopped beside Cole without being invited. You look calm, Pel said. I am calm, Cole said. That worries me more than if you were angry. Cole glanced at him. How much do you know about what happened with the Thurvak Collective? Pel was quiet for a moment. I was there. I was young, but I was there. I watched the whole thing from this building. He tapped his cane twice on the floor. I watched your people take apart an empire that had stood for 400 years, and I watched them do it in less time than it takes this body to agree on a trade route. Cole nodded slowly. Your people have been quiet for a long time, Pel said. Yes. The Vorkai think that quiet means weak. Most people make that mistake, Cole said. Pel looked at him carefully. Is there anything I can do? Cole thought about it. Find somewhere to be that isn't near any Vorkai allied system. Take your family if you have one here. Do it soon. How far is far enough? Pell asked. Cole thought about that too. He almost smiled, but not quite. Another galaxy, maybe, he said. Then he walked away down the corridor, his footsteps steady, his hands loose at his sides. On Earth, in a building that had no name on any public map, General Diane Mercer read Cole's message for the third time. She was 62 years old and had spent most of her life preparing for something she had quietly hoped would never come. She set the message down on her desk and looked at the wall across from her. The wall had a painting on it, a landscape from somewhere in Colorado, mountains, and a river and a lot of sky. She looked at it for a long time. Then she turned away from the painting and reached into the bottom drawer of her desk. She took out a phone. It was an older model, built for a specific purpose, and it had a small red seal on the back that identified its classification level. She had not used it in 31 years. The last person to use it before her had been a general named Paul Oswald, and he had used it to end a war that the rest of the galaxy still talked about in quiet voices. She turned the phone over in her hands once. Then she made the call. The voice that answered was not a person. It was a system, calm, steady, waiting. It asked for her authorization code, her biometric confirmation, and her verbal command. She gave all three. There was a pause. Then the system said, "Authorization accepted. Standing orders now active. Confirmation code transmitted to all staging points." Diane set the phone down and leaned back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling. Outside the building, the city was going about its normal day. People were walking to work, buying food, arguing over small things and laughing over smaller ones. None of them knew what had just been set in motion. None of them needed to. She picked up a regular phone and called her assistant. "Get me a full briefing in 1 hour," she said. "And tell the fleet coordinators I want a status report from all 17 points by end of day." She hung up and looked at the painting one more time. "They always forget," she said quietly to no one. Then she got to work. The Concord archive was located 4 levels below the main assembly hall, deep enough that the noise from above became nothing more than a low hum in the walls. The rooms down there were cool and dry and very still. Rows of storage units lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each one holding records going back thousands of years. The lighting was soft and yellowish, the kind that was easy on old eyes. It was the kind of place where you could forget that time was moving. Pell Vajura had spent most of his long life in those rooms. He knew where everything was. He knew which records had never been opened since they were filed, and which ones had been opened so many times that the access logs had to be archived separately. One record in particular had been opened more than almost any other in the entire collection. It was not the record of any great alliance or famous peace treaty. It was the record of what happened to the Thrvac Collective. The day after the burning of the charter page, Pell pulled that record and sat with it at a small table in the far corner of the archive. He had read it before. He had read it many times. But he read it again now, slowly, because he needed to remind himself exactly what was coming. The Thrvac Collective had been a powerful empire. They had controlled 11 star systems at their peak, with a population of several billion spread across dozens of colony worlds. They were not gentle, but they were not unusual in that way. Most empires that had lasted as long as theirs had blood somewhere in their history. What made the collective different was the specific thing they chose to do 300 years ago. A human colony called Harrow Station sat near the edge of Thrvac-controlled space. It was a small settlement, farming operations, a few thousand people, nothing military. The collective had wanted the station's location for resource extraction. They sent a message asking the humans to leave. The humans sent back a polite refusal and asked to negotiate. The collective sent a second message. The humans sent a second polite refusal with a longer offer to negotiate. The collective decided that was enough talking. What the Thrvac military did to Harrow Station was fast and complete. They hit it in the early morning cycle when most of the colonists were sleeping. 612 people died. 49 survived by hiding in a deep storage unit that the Thrvac ships missed. Those 49 were eventually picked up by a human patrol vessel 3 weeks later. Earth sent a formal protest to the collective government. The collective did not respond. Earth sent a second protest. The collective's foreign office returned it unopened. A Concord representative offered to mediate. The collective told the representative that the matter was settled and that no further discussion was needed. That was the last diplomatic communication between any party and the ThroneSci-Fi collective. Pell read the next section of the record carefully, even though he knew it by heart. It described what followed as a military response of comprehensive and sustained nature. That was the Concord's official language. It was accurate in the way that saying a flood was wet was accurate. It was not nearly enough. Humans had never fought the way other species fought. Most civilizations that went to war operated on a set of shared understandings. You fought at the front line, you protected your civilian population, you kept certain things separate from the conflict. There were rules, spoken and unspoken, that almost everyone followed because everyone had agreed that some limits made war survivable for both sides. Humanity had learned those rules. They knew them well. They had agreed to them in every formal treaty they had ever signed. But the ThroneSci-Fi collective had not given them a war. The collective had killed sleeping farmers. And humans, it turned out, did not respond to that the same way they responded to a war. The human fleet that moved against the collective was not the largest ever assembled in the region, but it was fast and it was organized in a way that none of the collective's commanders had trained against. They did not approach from one direction. They did not announce their arrival. They did not strike the military targets first. They struck everything at once: supply lines, fuel depots, communication relays, shipyards, with a coordination that the collective's defense systems had no framework to counter. Within 3 weeks the collective had lost its ability to resupply its own border fleets. Within 5 weeks those fleets had begun to fragment. Within 11 weeks it was over. But the fleet was only part of it. The ThroneSci-Fi leadership had scattered when the capital system fell. They had allies who offered them shelter. Neutral stations that did not ask questions. Trade partners who looked the other way. Humans found all of them. Not quickly, but completely. One by one, every official who had signed the order for the Harrow Station strike was located and brought to account. Every allied nation that had hidden ThroneSci-Fi assets was formally notified that this was being remembered. Not threatened. Just remembered. In a tone that made the difference between those two words feel very small. The Concord did not intervene. This was the part that Pell always stopped on when he read the record. The Concord had the authority to step in. They had the numbers. But they had watched the first 3 weeks of the campaign, and then they had a very long closed-door meeting, and after that meeting they did nothing except pass the resolution that eventually became the rule written into the charter. The rule about never provoking humanity. Pell closed the record and sat for a while with his hands on the table. He was thinking about Vren Solak and the burning page and the way the hall had gone silent. He was thinking about Cole Hargrove's face, which had given nothing away. He was thinking about what Cole had said about finding somewhere far to be. He opened a different file. It was a personal file, one he maintained himself. It contained names, species and individuals he had encountered over the years who were, in his private assessment, genuinely wise. Not just intelligent. Not just experienced. Wise. He scrolled through the list. Most of the names on it were very old. A few were gone. Near the bottom, he had added Cole's name 2 years ago after a conversation about diplomacy that had impressed him. He closed the file. He thought about something his teacher had told him when he was a young archivist, newly arrived at the Concord and full of careful opinions about how civilizations worked. His teacher had been even older than Pell was now. She had said, "Every empire that rises fast believes it is the first one to ever rise fast. It never occurs to them to ask why the old ones are so quiet." Pell stood up slowly, leaning on his cane, and began to put the record away. He had already made arrangements for his assistant to take emergency leave. He had quietly moved certain irreplaceable archive materials to an off-site storage facility in a neutral system. He had, that morning, booked passage on a transport heading far from any Vorkai-aligned world. He was old and he moved slowly and he had seen a great many things in his long life. But he was not a fool. He had read the ThroneSci-Fi record too many times to be a fool about this. He turned off the light in the corner of the archive and walked toward the exit, his cane tapping quietly on the stone floor, each step patient and unhurried, the way a very old and very careful person walks when they have already decided where they're going. 3 weeks passed after the burning of the charter page, and Earth said nothing. No broadcasts. No statements from government officials. No military vessels appeared on any of the long-range sensor grids that the Vorkai operated along the border. The human diplomatic office at the Concord sent no formal complaints, filed no motions, and requested no emergency sessions. Cole Hargrove continued to show up at his desk each morning and do his work the same as always, reviewing reports, attending minor committee meetings, eating lunch in the same corner of the Concorde's common area. It was the silence that began to bother Admiral Grath Vaughn. Grath commanded the Vorkai's forward border fleet, which was currently positioned along the edge of the zone that separated Vorkai-controlled space from human territory. He was not a patient man. He had built his career on pressure, on pushing, testing, watching where things gave way. Silence from an enemy did not mean peace to him. It meant they were thinking. And he did not like giving enemies time to think. He called a meeting with his senior officers and laid out what he was considering. He wanted to send a strike group into the outer edge of human freight traffic, not a major action, just enough to get a reaction. He wanted to see how fast humanity would respond, what kind of ships they would send, and whether the response would be measured or panicked. Information like that was worth more than any treaty. His second-in-command, a careful officer named Drael Voss, told him it was a bad idea. Drael had read more history than most Vorkai commanders cared to. He said the silence was not confusion. He said it felt like something else. Grath listened to him the way a man listens to someone he has already decided to ignore, and then he gave the order anyway. The strike group found a human freight convoy 3 days later near a waypoint called Sector 11, in a quiet stretch of space that saw mostly cargo traffic. There were 6 freight vessels and 1 small escort ship. The Vorkai strike group was 7 warships. It was not a fight. It was over in minutes. All 6 freight ships were destroyed. The escort ship was disabled. Of the 14 crew members across all 7 vessels, 12 were killed. 2 were pulled from the wreckage alive and brought aboard the flagship as prisoners. Grath sent his report to ThroneSci-Fi with a tone that was close to satisfaction. He noted that human response time to distress signals in that sector appeared to be slow, that their cargo ships had minimal defensive capability, and that no military vessels had arrived to intercept the strike group before it withdrew. He suggested this confirmed that humanity's reputation was outdated. He then had the 2 prisoners moved to a visible holding area near the flagship's observation deck, where Vorkai crew members could walk past and see them. He called it a display of proof. He told his officers that sometimes you needed to show a thing plainly before people would accept that the old stories were just stories. At the Concorde, news of the convoy attack arrived in the form of a quiet notification on Cole's desk. He read it. He read it again. He sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked to the main assembly hall. He did not ask for floor time in advance. He simply walked to the speaking area and waited until the current discussion paused. The moderator looked at him with some discomfort and acknowledged him. Cole looked at the full assembly. His voice was even. 14 crew members were aboard the vessels that were attacked in Sector 11, he said. 12 of them are dead. 2 are being held by Vorkai forces. He paused for exactly 1 second. The human delegation is formally withdrawing its diplomatic presence from the Galactic Concorde. We will not be filing any motions, protests, or requests for arbitration. All further communication from Earth will be carried out through other means. He looked at the Vorkai section when he said the last sentence. ThroneSci-Fi met his eyes without expression. Cole turned and walked out of the hall. The room erupted behind him. He did not look back. In the corridor outside, a young Concorde aide named Saren Kahl hurried to catch up with him. She was new to the building and still believed that most problems could be addressed through the right process if you found it quickly enough. She fell into step beside Cole and asked what he had meant by other means. Cole did not slow down. It means we are done talking, he said. But there has to be a channel, she said. There always has to be a channel. That is how the Concorde works. The Concorde works for civilizations that agree to its rules, Cole said. Those rules exist because everyone agreed that certain things were not acceptable. The Vorkai have now made it very clear which rules they respect. He stopped walking and looked at her. His tone was not unkind, but it was final. Go to your supervisor. Tell them you need emergency clearance to seal the lower floors of this building. Then go home and make sure anyone you care about is not near a Vorkai allied system. Saren stared at him. How serious is this? Cole looked at her for a moment. He seemed to be deciding how much to say. You know the rule that was burned, he said. Yes, she said. It was written for a reason, he said. Not to protect us. To protect everyone else. He walked away down the corridor and did not look back a second time. That same evening, Saren found her supervisor and passed on the message. Her supervisor went pale and began making calls immediately, which told Saren that the people who had been here longest already understood what Cole's words meant. Deep in space, in 17 locations spread across a region that did not appear on any public star chart, lights came on for the first time in decades. They were the lights of facilities that had been kept in cold storage, maintained by automated systems, monitored by a small number of people who had signed agreements that required them to stay silent about what they were maintaining. The facilities were large. Some of them were very large. Inside them, machinery began to warm up, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, like something waking from a long and intentional sleep. On the Vorkai flagship, Grath Vaughn sat in his command chair and looked at the two human prisoners through the observation window. They were sitting on the floor of the holding area. They were not crying. They were not begging. One of them was looking at the wall. The other one was looking directly back at Grath through the glass, steady and calm, as if he were the one waiting for something and Grath were the one who did not know it yet. Grath told himself it was nothing. But he kept the lights in his quarters on that night. The Vorkai border campaign began with confidence. Vren Salak had planned it carefully over the 3 weeks of Earth silence. He had pulled his best commanders, his fastest fleets, and his most experienced war planners into the operation. The plan was to push hard into human border space, take several key waypoints, and force Earth into a position where they had to respond visibly and quickly. A fast, decisive move, the kind the Vorkai had used to win their last 3 wars. Establish dominance before the enemy can organize. Make them react to you, never the other way around. The first 2 groups crossed into human territory on a morning cycle and found exactly nothing. The stations near the border were empty. Not destroyed, empty. Equipment was gone. Personnel were gone. In some places, the lights were still on and the environmental systems were still running, as if everyone had simply stood up and walked out. There were no bodies, no signs of panic, no emergency messages left behind. The Vorkai commander sent scouts deeper in and found the same thing: quiet, empty outposts, like the inside of a structure that someone had cleaned out very deliberately before leaving. Drael Voss sent a private message to Grath Vaughn from his own ship. The message said only, "This is wrong." Grath told him to stop being nervous and keep moving. They found the first ambush in a stretch of open space near a dust cloud that did not appear to be anything significant on any map. The lead battle group of 7 ships was moving in formation, standard patrol spread, sensors at full range, when the engagement began. What struck them was not a fleet that they could see forming up from a distance and preparing to attack. The human ship simply appeared, close, already in position, already firing, and the targeting systems on the Vorkai vessels registered multiple simultaneous contacts from directions that the formation's defensive profile had no coverage for. The lead battle group was gone in under 4 minutes. Fleet Commander Nathan Cross had planned the ambush from a command ship that the Vorkai sensors never detected, positioned inside the dust cloud at a distance that most warships would not have operated from because the interference made targeting unreliable. Human navigation systems handled interference differently. Nathan had known that, and he had built the ambush around it. He watched the engagement data come in from his officers and said nothing until it was confirmed complete. Then he gave the order to reposition for the second contact point. Word reached the main Vorkai fleet fast. Vren Salak ordered the advance paused and demanded a full report from the surviving ships in the area. The survivors described what had happened in terms that did not make tactical sense: ships that fired before their presence was registered, attack vectors that no conventional fleet would use because they required impossible precision at that range, withdrawal movements that disappeared back into sensor darkness before any counter-pursuit could be organized. Vren called his senior strategists together. He wanted options. He wanted an explanation for how a species that had been quiet for 30 years could put ships in the field that fought like that. One of his strategists, a senior officer named Vale Kor who had once served as a Concord observer, was quiet through most of the meeting. When Vren asked him directly, Vale looked at the table and said the thing no one else was willing to say. "We have not seen their fleet," Vale said. Vren told him to speak plainly. "What we have encountered so far is their border patrol," Vale said. "Local units. Ships assigned to a region. Not the main body." He looked up. "I was at the Concord for 6 years. I read a great deal during that time. The Thurvak Collective thought the same thing we are thinking right now. They thought that what they were seeing was the full picture. It was not. It was never the full picture. The room was very quiet. Then where is the main body? Vren asked. I do not know, Vale said. That is what concerns me. The second offensive push was launched 2 days later, and it ended worse than the first. Nathan Cross had moved his assets overnight, and the Vorkai found a completely different set of contact points than the ones their intelligence had estimated. Human ships engaged from unexpected elevations relative to the battle plane, an approach that most species did not use because the energy cost was considered too high. Human engineering, it turned out, had solved that problem somewhere in the quiet decades. The Vorkai formation broke apart trying to respond to contacts from above and below and both flanks at the same time. After that engagement, 3 of Graf Vaughn's ship captains refused to advance further. They sent their refusals in writing. Graf had them removed from command, which took time and created confusion, and by the time order was restored, Nathan Cross had repositioned again. On the flagship, Graf sat with the engagement reports stacked in front of him and read them one by one. He was not afraid, he told himself he was not afraid, but he was beginning to feel something he had not felt in any of the 3 previous wars. He was beginning to feel like he did not understand the thing he was fighting. He had always been able to build a picture of an enemy in his mind. A shape. A pattern. Something to push against and measure. He could not build that picture here. Every time he reached for it, it moved. The human prisoners were still in the holding area on the flagship. They had been there for over a week now. Graf walked past the observation window late in the ship's night cycle, unable to sleep. The same one who had looked back at him that first night was awake again. He was sitting with his back against the wall and his arms across his knees, and when Graf appeared at the window he looked up and met his eyes the same as before. Steady. Patient. Waiting. Graf stopped. He looked at the prisoner for a long moment. The prisoner looked back. What are you waiting for? Graf asked, even though the sound would not carry through the glass. The prisoner could not hear him. But something in the man's expression, calm and flat and completely without fear, made Graf feel the question go unanswered in a way that was worse than any answer would have been. He walked back to his quarters and sent a message to Vren Salak. The message asked, carefully and without emotion, whether they had any intelligence at all on the location of Earth's main fleet. He sent it and then sat at his desk and waited. The response came back in less than an hour. It said, working on it. That was all. Graf looked at those 2 words for a long time. Outside the flagship, the stars were still and quiet, the way space always was. But the quiet felt different now. It felt less like nothing and more like something very large holding its breath. The third Vorkai offensive never made it past the first hour. Nathan Cross had not moved to a new position this time. He had moved to 3 new positions, split his command across them, and linked the groups through a coordination system that operated on a channel the Vorkai had not identified in any of the previous engagements. When the Vorkai advance fleet crossed into the sector, it encountered simultaneous contact from 3 separate directions before any ship in the formation had completed its entry maneuver. The response time required to deal with 3 independent threats at once was longer than the Vorkai ships had. The math was simple and brutal. Nathan watched the engagement feeds from his command chair and gave corrections twice. That was all the engagement required from him. When it was over, the surviving Vorkai ships ran. Not a tactical retreat, a run. Ships breaking formation and burning hard away from the contact zone with no coordination between them, each one trying to create distance on its own. Nathan did not pursue them. He gave the order to hold position and let them go. His officers understood without being told. You let them run because they would carry the story with them. Every ship that made it back to Vorkai space was a messenger. The message did not need to be written. The message was in the way they were running. One of Nathan's younger officers, a woman named Laura Finch who had been quiet through most of the campaign, said what several others were probably thinking. She asked why they were stopping. She said they had the momentum and the positioning to pursue and end the forward fleet entirely. Nathan looked at her for a moment. We are not trying to destroy their fleet, he said. We are trying to make them stop. Those are 2 very different problems, and one of them takes a lot less time. Laura thought about that and nodded, and she did not ask again. On the Vorkai side, the collapse happened faster than anyone had predicted. Vren Salak's War Council had been a confident group 3 weeks earlier. Now they met in a room where no one wanted to speak first. The engagement reports were on the table. The casualty numbers were on the table. The reports from the surviving captains were on the table. Drael Voss read them all without comment. Veilcor sat with his hands folded and looked at the wall. Vren asked for options. He asked twice. The third time he asked, Drael Voss told him plainly that the military options had narrowed to the point where the council should be talking to lawyers and diplomats instead of admirals. Vren looked at him with something that might have been fury and might have been fear, and then he said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. By the end of that day, the Vorkai had relieved Vren Solak of command. It was not announced publicly. He was simply no longer in the council room. A new acting council took his place, and the first thing they agreed on was that they needed someone outside their government to carry a message to the human side. They sent a request to the Galactic Concord. Pel Vajura, who had boarded a transport headed for a distant neutral station but had not yet departed, received the message. He read it carefully. Then he looked out the window of the departure terminal at the station around him and thought for a while. He made a decision that he would think about many times afterward. He cancelled his transport booking and went back to his archive. It took him 4 days to locate Cole Hargrove. Cole had moved to a small office on a neutral station near the border region, a place with no official name and no diplomatic designation. When Pel arrived, Cole opened the door and looked at him without surprise. "I thought you were leaving," Cole said. "I was," Pel said. "Then someone needed an old archivist." Cole stepped back and let him in. Pel delivered the message. The Vorkai Council wanted to stop. They would accept terms. They were asking what the terms were. Cole listened to everything and then sat quietly for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was the same even tone it had been in the Concord Hall and in every corridor conversation before this. He said there were 3 conditions. The 2 human prisoners taken from the freight convoy were to be returned immediately, unharmed, with full medical assessment upon arrival. Every Vorkai official who had signed the order to burn the charter page was to be handed to a Concord tribunal for accountability proceedings. And the Vorkai Dominion was to formally reinscribe the old rule into the Concord Charter, in their own language, with their own seal, so that no one could say in the future that it was unclear or open to interpretation. Pel wrote it down and asked if there was anything else. Cole thought about the 12 crew members who had not come home from Sector 11. "No," he said. "That is enough." All 3 conditions were met within 4 days. The Vorkai moved quickly, much more quickly than their council had ever moved on anything peaceful. Grathvon was among the officials handed to the tribunal. He went without resistance, which surprised some people. The 2 human prisoners were returned to a human medical vessel at the border. Both were alive. Both were in worse shape than the brief reports had suggested, but they were alive. When they were brought aboard the medical ship and the ship's doctor came to assess them, the one who had looked back at Grath through the glass for days said one sentence before asking for water. He said, "I knew they were coming." In the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Concord, the new inscription was completed in a formal session attended by nearly every member delegation. The charter page was new, the writing was clean, and the Vorkai seal was pressed into it in full view of the assembly. The session was recorded and added to the permanent archive. Near the back of the hall, a young diplomat from a small species that had joined the Concord only 8 years ago leaned over to her senior colleague and spoke quietly. She asked why humanity was the only species in the charter that had a rule named after it. There was no rule that said do not provoke the Dravani, or the Soak Confederation, or the Paulian Assembly. Just the one species. She asked what made them different. Her colleague was old enough to have been alive during the Thurvak period. He did not answer right away. He watched the Vorkai representative press the seal into the page and then step back. He watched the moderator declare the session complete. He watched the hall begin to fill with the noise of hundreds of different alien voices all starting to breathe again. "Every species in this hall has limits," her colleague said finally. "Most of them, if you push hard enough, will eventually give way or give in. They will calculate what they can afford to lose and they will stop before they lose it." He paused. Humans do not calculate that way. Once you take something from them, really take it, the way the Thurvak took those 600 people, the way the Vorkai took those 14 crew members, they do not ask how much it will cost to get it back. They just come. He looked at the new charter page being carried to its display position at the front of the hall. The rule is not there to protect them. It is there to protect everyone else from what happens when you forget that. The young diplomat thought about that. She looked at the human section, where Cole Hargrove had just walked back in and taken his seat. He looked exactly as he had looked every other day, calm, settled, unremarkable. Like a man who had simply come in to do his work. She watched him for a moment. Then she turned back to the front of the hall and decided she would read the Thurvac archive herself, from the beginning, before she did anything else this week. It seemed like the right thing to do.